Sundays at my house growing up in the Greensboro, North Carolina, in the 1950s and the 1960s was a very special time. And I believe that even though every household and every family is so very unique, that we all had pretty much the same routine. That is, we started preparing for our Sundays on Saturday. The Saturday before, we would go grocery shopping to make sure we had everything we needed for our Sunday dinner. We would buy things that we might need for our hair. I remember my mother, if she needed stockings or something for her church, we would get them on Saturday. My sister and I didn't wear stockings until we were teenagers. Our dress uniform, if you will, for church was a pretty dress gathered at the waist. We wore crinoline slips. These are slips that my mother used to starch so they would stand out far, and we felt like we had on princess dresses. And our shoes, until we were teenagers, our shoes were always black patent leather Mary Jane shoes. So we'd go downtown, we'd do all our shopping on Saturday, and then when we'd come back, Saturday evening, we would start preparing the food. And so my mother and the food for Sunday, there was always a big spread on Sundays when the money was right. There was always a big spread, and that spread would include always potato salad, rice with amazing gravy, fried chicken and or ham, sometimes ribs, sometimes collard greens, string beans, candy yams, lemonade, homemade lemonade, some dessert of some sort, usually sweet potato pie or something like that. And so it was just a wonderful meal. Our meals on Sunday were like a lot of people's meals are for Thanksgiving. And we just had a spread and we would gather around the table and eat. But on Saturday night, besides preparing the meal, the idea was to make the meal and have everything finished before we went to Sunday school in church, so that when we returned, all my mother had to do was heat up and warm up the dishes and everything would be prepared. There'd be no serious cooking that needed to be done. And so on Saturday night, we would prepare our food, and then we would prepare, for instance, get the clothes out, choose what we were going to wear to Sunday school, and my sister and I would lay the dress that we were going to wear at the foot of our beds and get our shoes, and we just put everything, we just were preparing everything. My mother would fix our hair. Our hair she would straighten it with a hot comb. We were not a family that was into the natural hair. In fact, most people in the community were not into the natural hair at that time. And so my mother thought it was very important for the hair to be straightened because she felt it just separated us from days of old, and she just felt it made us look nicer and with the straightened hair. And so having for our family, of course, when we were little, people used to braid and children had natural hair but as you got older, it was always straightened, at least in my family and most of the families in my community, because I remember the first time someone showed up at my high school, and I went to an all-black high school, but the first time these two girls showed up with an afro, oh my goodness, it was a big event. And I believe those two girls, in fact, I know those two girls were sent home because we didn't know what to do with that. Because, like I said, straightened hair was always a symbol that we were moving forward, that we were moving up. And we can debate this and go back, but that's just how it was at the time when I was growing up. So we would get our hair straightened, and then on certain occasions, or if we were going to be singing in choir or there was a program at church, my mother would curl our hair. And the way she did that is she would take a paper bag, tear it into strips, and twist the strips. And then she would roll our hair on those strips. And so in the morning when we woke up on Sunday morning, we would have curls. Maybe not curls all over all the time, but at least we'd have a fresh set of curly bangs to deal with. And then there would be some type of hat. We usually wore a hat, especially on Easter, but even when it wasn't Easter, we wore hats, we wore gloves to church, we were about matching. And even though sometimes, as my mother used to say, we don't have two dimes to rub together, but she'd always say, when you walk out of this house, you're going to look like a million. When we walk out of this house, we're going to look like a million. And we did. My mother didn't go to Sunday school, so my older sister, and my two younger brothers would walk to Sunday school. We didn't have a car. Sometimes people would give us a ride, but most of the time we walked. And when I think about the distance that we walked to get to Sunday school now, I don't think I would let a child walk that distance in this day and age by themselves, even four of them, a group of four. I would not let walk that distance. Later, the church was rebuilt in our neighborhood, which was closer to us. But when we were very small, we used to walk to this church. And to get to the church, we would take a shortcut through the campus of Bennett College. Bennett College, to this day, is still an all-girls college. It is one of the historically black colleges, and we used to walk through their campus, and I thought their campus was so well. It was. I didn't just think it was. They had an amazingly beautiful campus, and I remember that was my first introduction to magnolia trees. They had magnolia trees on their campus, so we would walk through, and some of the girls would lean out of their windows on Sunday mornings, and they'd see us walking, and they'd say, "Are y'all going to Sunday school?" And we'd say, and they say, "Well, y'all sure do look pretty." And that would just, my day had been made just from these women who I thought were pretty women were just hanging out the window and saying, "Y'all sure do look pretty." And there was nothing we could do. We tried to pretend like, okay, we're cool. But inside, it just made my heart jump. And we'd get to church. We'd do Sunday school. My mother would join us after Sunday school for church. And then sitting through church was not easy for me. We had a very pulled up church, meaning that there wasn't a lot of shouting, and we didn't have drums and all that stuff going on. We had a very pulled up church that if you were to shout or make a lot of noise, everyone would look at you like, "What is wrong with you?" And so we sang songs from hymnals, and we used our upper register to sing these songs. And so that was the kind of church. It was really hard for me to stay awake during those services when I was young. And so I have great memories of my mother poking me with her elbow to get me to wake up. And then usually she had dentine in her purse, and she would just take out a piece of dentine, take the wrapper off, and slip it into my hand. And I just cherish that memory so much. So after church, we would walk back home with my mother. We would change out of our church clothes into our play or our home clothes. And then my mother would warm up the dinner. My father was not one to go to church, so he would be home. And when we got home, my mother would heat up the dinner, and we would all gather around, the four kids, my father and my mother, around this table with this wonderful food on Sundays. And that's what we did on Sundays. After the meal, we would go outside and we could play with our friends. And Sunday afternoons, we could visit our friends. That would be a time when my mother would take us to visit someone, or someone would come to visit us. When we were teenagers, one of the things I remember we started doing is the kids from my school, there was a certain dairy bar, ice cream bar, where we would hang out at this ice cream bar on Sunday afternoons. I always wanted to be home in time to catch the Ed Sullivan Show, because I just thought that was an amazing show with amazing guests. Of course, that was the first time we had a really good look at the Supremes and the Beatles, and I just thought it was a fabulous show. And so that was our Sundays. And then, of course, we'd get ready for school the next day.